A river in central Italy in the autumn of 1943. It is not much of a river, 40 feet of brown water between two shallow banks, the kind of thing you could throw a stone across. In peacetime, nobody would look at it twice. Tonight, it is the most important thing for miles, because the bridge that crossed it is lying in the water in pieces. The German engineers did that. They did it carefully, and they did it last, after the final vehicle of the rearguard was across. They packed the charges at the abutments, they blew the span into the riverbed, and then they walked away up the far slope without hurrying. Because they know exactly what they have just bought. They have bought time. That is the whole point. A blown bridge is not meant to stop an army, it is meant to slow one, and slowing an army is how you survive a retreat. The Allies will come down to this bank, and they will stop. Then they will bring up engineers, and heavy plant, and cranes, and they will spend days on it. And while they do that, the Germans will be 20 miles back, digging a new line into a new ridge. That is the arithmetic of the Italian campaign, and it has worked at every river since Salerno. So the German officer who blew this bridge does the sensible thing. He writes it up, and he goes to sleep. And in the morning, there is a bridge. Not a raft, not a ford, a bridge. Steel, square, ugly, and carrying tanks across it in single file, one after another, into the country he was supposed to be holding. Tonight's file is about the thing that put it there. It is a box of steel panels, invented by a British civil servant who sketched the idea on the back of an envelope, and it did something no weapon in the war did. It changed how fast an army could move. Stay with me, because by the end, you will understand why the German plan to blow every bridge in Italy quietly stopped working, and why the thing that beat it is still standing in about 40 countries today. Start with something nobody puts on a recruiting poster. An army does not move at the speed of its tanks, it moves at the speed of its bridges. You can have the best armor in the world, and it is worth nothing on the wrong side of 40 feet of water. Everything an army is made of has to cross. The tanks, yes, but also the fuel that feeds them, the ammunition, the food, the ambulances going the other way. And all of it has to cross on something that will take the weight, which in 1943 meant something that would take 30 tons and not fold. Now look at where the Allies chose to fight. Italy is a long leg of mountains with rivers running off both sides of the spine, hundreds of them, every few miles, cutting across the line of advance at right angles. It is, from an engineer's point of view, close to the worst country in Europe to attack up. The Germans understood this better than anyone, and they built their entire retreat around it. It is called demolition in depth, and it is not a panic measure, it is a doctrine. You do not just blow the bridges, you blow the bridges, then you crater the road at the approaches, then you mine the crater, then you register your artillery on the gap, so that anyone trying to repair it is working under shell fire. Every culvert, every stone arch, every little farm crossing that a jeep might use. And it worked, because bridging in 1940 was slow. Think about what building a military bridge actually meant before this story starts. The kit was heavy, and it came in big pieces, which meant you needed cranes and heavy transport to move it, and cranes and heavy transport need a road, and the road is exactly the thing that has just been cratered and mined. The bridges you could build quickly were light and would not take a tank. The bridges that would take a tank were not quick. There was no equipment in any army that was both. So an army would arrive at a river and stop, and the stopping is what mattered. A day here, 3 days there, a week at a bad one, and in that time the enemy is not idle. He is digging. He is sitting his guns on the next ridge, in daylight, at leisure, choosing his ground. Every hour the advance stands still at a riverbank is an hour that gets paid for later, in men, on the slope of whatever hill he has just fortified. Which is why the answer to this problem, when it came, did not look like a weapon at all. It looked like a pile of identical steel panels stacked in the back of a lorry. The man who solved it was not a soldier. Donald Bailey was a civil servant, an engineer at the experimental bridging establishment at Christchurch on the south coast of England, which is exactly the kind of quiet government outfit that history usually forgets. He was a bridge man to his bones. In his own time, for pleasure, he built model bridges. In 1940, he sketched a proposal on the back of an envelope. That detail gets repeated so often that it sounds like a story someone invented later. but the shape of what he drew is the important part, and the shape is this. Stop designing bridges and start designing a bridge kit. Here is the idea in one sentence. Instead of building a bridge for a gap, you make a standard panel, and you let the panel make any bridge you need. The panel is a welded steel lattice, 10 feet long and 5 feet high, and it weighs somewhere around 570 pounds. That number is not an accident. It is the heaviest thing that 6 men can pick up, carry, and set down without a crane, and that single constraint is the entire invention. Everything else follows from it. Because if 6 men can carry the piece, you do not need heavy plant at the riverbank. If you do not need heavy plant, you do not need the road repaired first. If you do not need the road repaired first, you can start building the moment you arrive, at night, in the mud, with nothing but men and hand tools and pins. And because every panel is identical, the bridge becomes arithmetic instead of engineering. You need a longer span, you add bays. You need to carry more weight. You do not redesign anything. You simply bolt a second row of panels alongside the first, and if that is not enough, a third, and then you stack them too high. Single, double, triple, the same part, used more times. A bailey could be built to carry up to around 70 tons and to span well over 200 feet, out of the same box of pieces that built the little 40-foot crossing. The Ministry of Supply asked for it in February 1941 and wanted a full-scale prototype by the 1st of May. Full production started that July, which for anyone who has ever watched a government procure anything is its own small miracle. But a kit is only half of it. The other half is what the men at the river actually do with it in the dark. Come back to the riverbank and watch it properly this time, because this is the part that never makes it into the films. There is no crane. That is the first thing to understand. You cannot swing a bridge into position, and you certainly cannot drop it in from above with the far bank in enemy hands. So the sappers do something cleverer, and much stranger to look at. They build the bridge backwards, on the near bank, lying flat. And at the front of it they assemble a light framework called the launching nose, sticking out ahead like a long steel finger. Then on rollers, they push the whole thing out over the water. The nose goes first, unsupported, hanging out over the river on nothing, held down by the weight of the bridge behind it. The men push. The bridge creeps forward, a few feet at a time. There is a moment, and every sapper who has done it knows this moment, where the balance is all wrong and the far end is sagging out over the current, and then the nose touches down on the far bank, and the whole thing settles, and it is a bridge. Now put that in the conditions it was actually done in. It is night, because building in daylight in view of German artillery is a way of dying. There are no lights, because lights draw shells. The riverbank has been churned into mud by the men and the vehicles that came before. It is often raining, because it is Italy in the winter, and it rains for weeks. And each of those panels weighs 570 pounds, and there are dozens of them, and 6 men carry every single one down to the water and lift it into place by hand, in the dark, in the mud, while listening for the whistle that means the gap has been registered by the guns on the far ridge. In good conditions, a short single bridge could be up in 3 or 4 hours. At night, longer. The first bailey ever built under enemy fire went in at Leonfort, in Sicily, put there by the 3rd Field Company of the Royal Canadian Engineers. On D-Day and the days after, engineers bridged the Cairn Canal and the Orne under fire of every kind, and this is worth sitting with for a second, because of who these men were. Not the assault infantry, not the tank crews. Engineers, working with their hands, at the one spot on the whole battlefield the enemy has already measured, doing heavy manual labor in the dark, unarmed for most of the job, on the assumption that the shelling will come and they will keep lifting anyway. The tanks that crossed in the morning got the photograph. The men who spent the night in the river got the bridge finished and then moved up the road to do it again at the next one. Which they did. Thousands of times. Here is where the small, clever thing turns into a strategic fact. By the end of the war, the American 5th Army and the British 8th Army had built more than 3,000 Bailey bridges in Sicily and Italy alone. Laid end to end, that is over 55 miles of bridge. Across the whole war, more than 600 firms turned out something like 700,000 panels, around 500,000 tons of bridging. Think about what those numbers mean at the riverbank. It means the panels were never the scarce thing. An engineer battalion did not have to be careful with them, did not have to send back for a special design, did not have to wait for the right bridge to arrive from somewhere. The right bridge was already in the trucks, in pieces, in quantity, and it fitted every gap because it fitted every gap by design. But a number that size hides what it cost to lay any one of them, so here is a single night out of the 3,000. January 1944, the Rapido, in front of Casino. The sappers of the 7th, 59th, and 225th Field Companies were sent to put an 80-foot bailey across a river the Germans had spent months preparing to defend. They started at 5 in the evening, and the Germans did something to them that tells you everything about this work. They fired illuminating rounds, but not over the bridge site. Behind it, star shells burning in the sky beyond the sappers, so that every man working at the water's edge stood out black against the light, perfectly outlined for the snipers and the gunners on the far bank. They kept building. 12 hours of it, lifting 570-pound panels in that light, and at 3 in the morning the bridge went out across the water. That is one bridge. There were more than 3,000. And now go back to the German officer from the opening, the one who blew his span into the river and went to sleep. His entire doctrine rests on one assumption, that a destroyed bridge costs the enemy days. That assumption was true for 100 years. It was true in 1940. It is the reason demolition in depth is worth the explosives and the effort and the risk of leaving a rearguard behind to do it. The Bailey did not make his demolition pointless. It made it cheap. It took the price of a blown bridge down from days to hours, and once that number moved, the whole structure of the German withdrawal stopped doing what it was built to do. You cannot buy time with a river if the enemy carries its own river's worth of bridges in the back of a lorry and can build one in the dark before your report reaches division. Montgomery, who was not a man given to sharing credit, put his name to it flatly. As far as my own operations were concerned, with the 8th Army in Italy and with 21st Army Group in Northwest Europe, I could never have maintained the speed and tempo of forward movement without large supplies of Bailey bridging. Speed and tempo, not firepower, not courage, the rate at which an army can keep moving forward, which is the thing that decides whether the enemy gets to choose his ground or not, and the last word on scale belongs to the Rhine. In 1945, at Ries in Germany, the Royal Canadian Engineers put a Bailey across the Rhine and called it Blackfriars Bridge. With its ramps, it ran 1,814 feet, the longest Bailey ever built. A river that had been the western wall of Germany for 2,000 years, crossed on panels that 6 men could carry. Everything in this story was designed to be temporary. That is not a throwaway line, it is the design brief. A Bailey is meant to go in fast, carry the army over, and be pulled up again when the engineers get around to building something proper. It is scaffolding. It was never supposed to outlive the campaign it was thrown across, except nobody came to take them away. The war ended, and the armies went home, and the bridges stayed exactly where they were, because the local road still needed to cross the local river, and here was a bridge that already worked. In Italy, in France, in Holland, in Burma, a temporary steel span became the village crossing, and then it became the crossing everyone had always used, and then it became the crossing nobody thought about at all. They are still there. Not in a museum, in use. Bailey bridges are still carrying traffic in remote corners of dozens of countries, and the design is still manufactured and still deployed today, after earthquakes and floods, whenever somebody needs a bridge in a hurry and cannot wait for concrete. The pattern Donald Bailey drew on the back of an envelope in 1940 is, right now, holding up a lorry somewhere. The men who built them under fire are almost all gone now. The sappers who carried 570 pounds of steel down a muddy bank in the rain, in the dark, at the one place the German guns had already ranged, are not around to be asked about it, and most of them never told the story anyway, because to them it was not a story. It was a night's work, and there was another river in the morning, but their bridges are still standing. There is no monument to the Bailey Bridge, and it does not need one, because the monument is functional. Somewhere today, in a valley in Italy, or a back road in Normandy, or a mountain track in Asia, a farmer drives a truck across a piece of 1943 without giving it a thought, and the steel takes the weight, exactly as it was designed to, 80 years after the men who put it there moved on up the road. That is the strangest kind of victory a piece of equipment can have, not to be remembered, to still be working. Before you go, I've got a question for you. There is a decent chance you have driven over a baileybridge at some point without ever knowing what it was, because thousands of them are still in service. Have you crossed one? Tell me where in the comments. I'd genuinely like to know how far they've spread. And if you've stayed this long, 3 small things help keep this channel going. If you haven't liked the video, it takes a second, and it goes a long way toward putting this story in front of the people who'd want it most. Subscribe so you don't miss the next file. I open one every week. And share this one with someone who'd enjoy it. Until next time, take care.